Thanks for joining us at I Can Make Shoes. Today I'm going to show you how to make a pattern for a classic derby shoe. Okay, so in order to do this derby pattern we'll need a few things. Some masking tape, a piece of paper, pencil and eraser, a craft knife and some scissors. And of course you'll also need your last, which is or should be pre-taped up, ready for us to draw the pattern on. If you don't already know how to properly tape up a last, we do have another video demonstrating that. But for the sake of this pattern, we're just going to jump straight in. So it's quite important that you make sure that the base of the last is clear of any masking tape, because that will affect the size of the pattern. What we're going to do today is we're going to draw on the derby pattern onto the last. So obviously when you're doing this from home you've got quite a lot of creative freedom to do the shape however you'd like. But for the sake of making this as simple as possible, I'm going to do a really classic derby shape on here. Okay, so start by drawing on your design. Okay, so I have really roughly drawn on a classic derby shape there. We've got a heel cap area there, and we've got the two front sections here, and obviously the toe area. So this is the area here where your eyelets will go for your laces. So we can really roughly draw in a few there, just so that that helps us know where all the pieces are when we're doing our pattern. Now it is important when you're doing this from home that you use a ruler to make sure that they're evenly spaced apart, and obviously that they're in line in this area as well. Okay, one last thing I'm going to do here is I'm just going to draw in a tongue like that. Okay, so once you're happy with your design and you've finished moving any lines around that you want to move around, you can then go ahead and cut that out with your craft knife. Once you've cut around all of the lines, you can then remove any excess tape that you won't be using. And one final thing before we start to take all of the pieces off and lay them flat is that we want to put a small notch onto these pieces here on the inside, and that's to remind us which is the inside of the shoe and which is the outside of the shoe. So because we now have three sections here, we'll have to put a small notch onto each piece. Okay? So once we've done that, we can start to peel off our pieces. So I'm going to start by removing this side piece here. And once you've removed that, you can just lay it flat onto a piece of paper. Okay. So once you've got that flat, we'll just put it to the side and continue our way around the shoe. So I am going to remove the back section now. Now before I lay this piece down, I am going to cut a slit about 3/4 of the way up the back. This is going to help us to lay it flat, and it's also going to come in handy later on when we want to get that nice curve at the back of the shoe there. Now you'll find because of that curve that some of these areas are refusing to lay flat. All we do in that case is take some scissors and put a few snips in there like that. Okay. So once we've got that one in place, we'll again put that to the side, and we'll now do the second side panel here. And last but not least, we've got the front section of the shoe here. We can also see that at the front we've now got the length of the tongue, but we will need to obviously add in some width there. So I'm going to peel this off, and it may be the case that we'll need some extra paper to stick it down, but we'll just see how we go. Laying these lines nice and flat, and obviously getting that length of the tongue in there as well. So we'll flatten this out as much as we can. In some areas you'll get some pleats, and in some areas you'll need to put some snips. So first things first, we'll just add a small amount of paper or another piece, and then we can cut away the excess to this side here. Masking tape becomes a shoemaker's best friend when we're pattern making, so make sure you stock up. And in these areas where it's refusing to lay flat, we'll again just put a few snips into the paper, like so. Okay, so now that we have all of our pieces laid flat onto the paper, we can start to put our allowances in. Alright, so we're going to be putting our allowances into the pattern now. So I'm going to start with the front section here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to add a lasting allowance around this whole front area here. This is the feather edge of the shoe. So I like to do approximately 25 mil. So bringing that out to about that point there. And you want to follow the line of the pattern. And obviously when you're doing this at home, you can spend a bit more time with a ruler getting this perfectly neat and even. Okay. And then what I want to do in this area is I want to add an underlay allowance, because the front sections of the shoe will sit on top of that area. Now before I put that underlay allowance in, I need to decide how wide I would like my tongue to be so that I'm not overlapping that area. So we know that the tongue wants to be this high, so I usually just bring it around something like that. And like I said, it's up to you how wide or skinny the tongue is, or if you've got the tongue squared off at the top, that's all completely up to you. And then at this point I'll add approximately 5 mil of an underlay allowance across both of those lines, bringing it right down into the lasting allowance. Now I find it really helps to label your pattern as you go so that you remember what lines you've put in for what purpose. So I'm going to put in lasting allowance. And that's approximately 25 mil. And this area here is what we call an underlay allowance. So I'll put a UL And I'll just put 5mm next to it so that we know that that's approximately 5mm. Alright, let's move on now to some of our other pieces. So I'm going to start working on one of the side pieces here. What we want to do is we want to fold the top line of the shoe and obviously down the side here as well where the laces go. So I'm going to draw in 5mm and around the top as well. Okay, so before we move on, I'm just going to label that FA for folding allowance, 5mm, and FA, 5mm, and also this front section here is going to be a folding allowance as well. So we'll put FA, 5mm. Alright, a few other allowances need to go in here, down the back and at the front. Now, what we'll do at the back section is we'll put an underlay allowance for our heel cap to sit over the top. And this area here is actually going to be sitting on front of the toe and tongue area, which means that this area should also be a folding allowance and this one should be an underlay allowance. So again, I'm going to add 5mm on both those sides and just make sure that we label it correctly. Okay, so underlay 5mm and again with the folding allowance. Now you could also leave this whole area that we're folding as a raw edge if you wanted to, but we'll fold it for the sake of this pattern. Okay, lastly we've got our lasting allowance which goes on the feather edge. We're going to bring that down to about 25mm straight across like that, and we'll label that lasting allowance 25mm. Okay, I'm going to repeat that exact step again for the other side. Okay, it is important when we put the lasting allowance in on the other side that we remember to draw in that notch that we put in when it was on the last. This will just help us remember again which is the inside and which is the outside. Okay. So we're almost done here. We just have one more piece to do, and that is our back section. Now what we want to do here is we want to add the folding allowance to the whole top line around that edge, and we want to put the lasting allowance in the bottom. So we'll start by getting the folding allowance in, which again is approximately 5mm. And once we've done that, we want to put our lasting allowance in. Now it's really important that we remember that seam we put into the back there. We want to completely ignore that and pretend that it isn't even there. So we're just going to exclude the lasting allowance from that area. That way we'll actually stitch in a seam there and we will get that nice curve on the back of the shoe. We're not going to include any allowance there because we want it to be, if anything, just a little bit too tight so that we really have to stretch the leather over the last. And again, remembering to get that little notch into the lasting allowance there. Okay, so we'll label this one. And this is all folding allowance, 5 mil and 25. Okay, so all those pieces are now ready to be cut out. Okay, so this is what the pieces should look like once you've cut them out. I just want to mention at this stage as well that everything we've done at this point can be used for both men's shoes and women's shoes. So as you can see, we've got the men's derby there, and we've also got an example of a women's derby here using the exact same process. So with that being said, just to sort of show you really basically how it all pieces together, you can see that these two sections will now sit over the top like that, and that your back piece will be attached there like that. So what I'd like to do now is just take away the front section and show you how we can simplify this back section for your lining. So when doing the lining, quite often it's nicer to have this as one piece rather than to have it as 3 separate pieces. So the way in which we do that is just taking a little bit of masking tape, and we'll quite simply just overlap the back piece. Now it's really important that you make sure that this top line here is straight and even. If you've got a small discrepancy at the bottom here, that's fine, but you should actually have it pretty spot on if you're doing this from home and you've measured all of your allowances perfectly. So let me get that one in place. And that actually fits together quite well, considering I did it by eye. Alright, so that's then what your back section would look like as one piece. So if you did decide as well to do a derby pattern without a heel cap, it would look something like that. Thanks for watching. For more videos, subscribe to our I Can Make Shoes YouTube channel.